Thank you, Clemens, and thank you for inviting me here today. You can hear I've got a cough, so you'll just have to excuse me if I cough and sneeze. I'll do my best. I hope the rest of you got Clemens and my memo. It's orange and blue you should be wearing, and I see a few people have got it. So I'm going to talk about how we can prevent dementia, and I'm going to talk mainly about a study that we published in the end of July, which we launched in Philadelphia, the Lancet Commission on Dementia, which I hope many of you saw in the press. And these are the people that worked with me. We all worked very hard on it, but I want to particularly mention Andrew Summerlad, who's over there, Sergi Costa-Fried and Nahid McAdam, who were part of it. But it's an international team of multidisciplinary experts. And I'm going to talk about the prevention bit of this. So I'm going to why we should consider dementia preventable. A life course model, I'll try and explain it. I haven't got long, so I'm going to try and explain things relatively rapidly and simply, but there will be time to ask questions if it's not clear. I'm going to talk about the risks for dementia, what it means, a bit about the cost and economic benefit, because as Jenny says, economy is all at the moment, and what you can do individually to prevent dementia. So I think probably we all know that we are in an ageing society, as fortunately fewer people die at a young age. And that means as people get older, they're more likely to get dementia. There are more people with dementia. However, and that's expected to reach 132 million by 2050. However, over the past 2 decades or so, in many countries, in UK, Europe, America, there has been a 25% decrease in age-related prevalence. So if we look at what that means is, or age-related incidence, if we look at people between 70 and 75, there are 25% fewer per 100,000, or 75 and 80, 25% fewer per 100,000 developing dementias. That's an enormous thing. If we had drugs that could do that, we'd all be taking them. However, it's not true in all countries. So in East Asia, South America, basically East Asia and South America and South Asia, there is no decrease, and if anything, there is an increase. So that means that much of dementia is potentially, but not inevitably, preventable. We have to know what to do and do it to make a difference. And the mechanisms of prevention, how it happens, are thought to be an increase in cognitive reserve, which I will explain in a second, and a reduction in damage. And the improvements, even in high-income countries, you'll be unsurprised to know, are in higher income, more educated people, and in men more than women. So there are still large numbers of the population who have potential for improvements, even in high income countries like here. So cognitive or brain reserve is the ability for people to withstand damage to their brain. So if you get abnormal proteins or a lack of blood flow to your brain, then you are less likely to develop dementia or develop dementia later than you would if you did not have cognitive reserve. And that leads to what we call a compaction of morbidity, that people spend, those people who do develop dementia, develop it at an older age and spend fewer years with it. And I think that's what we all want. I think, and I think most people think, that it's inevitable that we all die, but we want to have a long, healthy life and a short, unhealthy life. So I think that's what we're all looking for. And this is a paper which shows it. So if you look at the bottom left-hand column, it shows the amount of neuropathology, things like plaques and tangles in your brain. And you can see that on average, the more of that, the more likely you are to have dementia. And the less of that, the more likely you are to have a high cognitive function, which is what we'd expect. But if we look at the individual graphs, if you look at the one on the top left, compared to this one here, you will see these are just individuals and how much abnormal pathology they have in their brain, you can see a huge overlap. So there are people who are able to withstand the same amount of pathology and be highly cognitively well, who have actually more pathology than some people who do not, who have severe dementia. So that's really important to know. So cognitive reserve is the name of the game, and that's what we all want. So we worked in the Lancet Commission. As I said, we were experts in different disciplines. We looked at existing evidence and we put it all together. And when it didn't, when people had not done that to be together, had not done systematic reviews and meta-analysis is what we called them. When they had not done that, we did some more. We did new ones ourselves. For things to be included as a risk factor, we had to have high quality, consistent evidence that if you changed it, it would make a difference, and evidence that preceded the development of dementia by more than 10 years, because it takes time to develop dementia, and we wanted to be sure that what we were talking about was not a symptom, but a risk factor. We have quite high thresholds, and we know that there are other risk factors. But we came through with 14 risk factors. And what we did is we put them together in what we call a population attributable fraction. You don't need to remember that, but I'm just trying to explain what we did is that people are just not like lab rats and mice. You can give them one thing and see what happens. People have lots of things together and they tend to cluster. So the person who is overweight is more likely to have high blood pressure, more likely to have diabetes, and more likely to have high cholesterol, although these things can occur. So we did some really quite complex calculations to account for what we call commonality, people having more than one thing. So if they have one risk factor, maybe that's not what's causing the problem. And I'm not going to explain how we did it, but it's in the paper, including the code, if you want to do it yourself. And this is what we came out with. This is a life course model of risk of dementia. So the things that I'd like you to notice is that we came out with slightly more than 45%, so nearly half of dementia is potentially modifiable, which is absolutely amazing, gives us hope and potential for change. And our life course model shows when in life that you should be thinking about tackling them, and midlife is a great time for most of them, but it's never too late. You can keep tackling them later on and it still makes a difference. But now I'm going to talk about some of the individual ones. The numbers in circles are the percentage of all dementias in the population that we think is attributable to that risk factor by itself. This is a change from the last one that we did in 2020, as fortunately worldwide education is increased. It's gone from one of the highest, the second highest, and now the two highest are hearing and cholesterol. I'm going to talk through individual ones. Educational attainment and cognitive activity are really important in giving you cognitive reserve and making you able to resist neuropathology. And globally, educational attainment has increased. It's still low in some countries. In here, the age of leaving school has gradually increased over most of our lifetimes. And for a long time, we weren't able to tell whether education in midlife really made, or cognitive stimulation in midlife really made a difference, because people who have education are those who seek out education in late life. But my colleague Mika Kivamaki, with a group of us, including myself, have done a massive analysis of populations from a variety of different countries and was able to actually find a lot of people who didn't have education and did have cognitive stimulation. So if we look at this, there's a sort of graph there, but I'm going to explain it. If you think the risk is one for people who who didn't have education and don't have cognitively stimulating jobs, then for people who didn't have education but have cognitively stimulating jobs, it goes down to about 80% of that. For people who had education but don't have cognitively stimulating jobs, it goes down to 70%. And for those of us who have both, it goes down to 60%. So education is important. It's never too late. And I just want to say that doing Sudoku makes you good at Sudoku, but it's not a global cognitive stimulation. I do it, but not to help my brain. Hearing loss is the second, it's the highest overall, but the second one I went to because it's in midlife. When we first started to do this, I was really surprised to find that hearing loss was such a big risk factor for dementia. But when I think about it now, and you know, surprise changes to explanation, it makes it is really makes absolute sense, because the easiest way to get cognitive stimulation is to hear. And I see our colleagues in the Jewish Deaf Association over there sitting and listening. Well, the good news is that long-term studies show that people who have corrected hearing loss, who use hearing aids, lose the excess risk. And also that there's been last year from the States, they had a big randomized controlled trial that came out where they had people who used hearing aids for 3 years compared to those who didn't. What happened is, it was really quite interesting. They had two groups of people and they had a pre-specified way of looking at it. So one group of people were people who had been in a very long-term study and they knew all about them, and they were older and had quite a lot of risk factors. And one was the ones they got from newspaper adverts. The people who they got from newspaper adverts, it didn't make any difference at all. And that was because they didn't deteriorate. They were the super healthy people, and quite a large portion of them went out and bought hearing aids, even although they weren't in that group. For the people who were older and with more and with more risk factors, it made a massive difference using hearing aids compared to those who didn't. So it's really important to think that we've got to target people who are at risk, at least in the short term and in the longer term. But think about getting your hearing tested and using hearing aids, because it's such a common problem as people get older. Cholesterol. So high LDL cholesterol, what is measured when you go to your GP and get it, is a risk factor. It's the second biggest account in the population after hearing, and there's clear evidence that people who in midlife get that treated and use statins, they lose their excess risk. Depression. Depression is a big risk factor for dementia. However, and this is, so for a long time we weren't sure whether dementia caused depression or depression caused dementia, and the answer is both. So if we look at people in midlife with untreated depression, they're at much higher likelihood of developing dementia 15, 20 years later. But people who were treated with either antidepressants or psychotherapy or got better by themselves no longer had an increased risk. I'm speeding up because it's solid. Traumatic brain injury. It's probably never been a surprise to us that traumatic brain injury might cause you to have problems with thinking. But what is a surprise, what's different from when I was in medical school, is that people who get better remain at increased risk. So over the next 20 years, so in the States, there's a high number of people who've been in military incidents and have had brain injury, got better, and then developed dementia in their 40s or 30s. In high-income countries, the biggest risk of head injury is from falls or violence, and these are somewhat related to alcohol as well. So there is some overlap. And in low-income countries, it's much more related to road traffic accidents. We know much more now about sports-related injuries, and certainly I sort of see in the media all the time about rugby and football. So big messages, they're not all the same. Rugby tends to be worse than others. Protecting your head is really important, and I'm really pleased to hear that now in primary schools that children are not allowed to head footballs anymore, and that if they do, it stops the game, and there's some sort of, I don't really understand football, there's some sort of penalty for it. That means there's no point in them practicing, and there's no point in them keeping doing it, which should be massively helpful. Physical inactivity, exercise and fitness, it is unsurprising to all of us that physical inactivity is a risk factor for dementia, because physical activity really seems to help everything. Good news is the thing that makes the most difference is going from sedentary to a bit of exercise. You do not need to do ultra marathons to make a difference. So people who are sedentary, maybe start walking, start doing whatever you like. There's no evidence that anything is better than anything else, but do some exercise that you like. If you like it, you're likely to keep doing it. Randomized controlled trials don't seem to make any difference. They tend to last for about a year. That's probably not long enough. So we need to, this needs to be something that you keep doing over time. Diabetes, move on to diabetes. There's lots more diabetes in society than there used to be, partly related to obesity and diet. If you keep your blood sugar within normal ranges, not at the lowest of range where it doesn't help, it actually may cause damage, but within normal range, you lose a lot of the excess risk, and the new drugs, the GLD-RA1s, in randomized controlled trials, which have been for diabetes, but they've measured cognition and in dementia, show a decrease, a specific decrease with them. So they look as if they're particularly good. So there's something quite tempting about GLP-1 RA receptor agonists, which you hear about in all the news, but this is only for diabetes. I'm not saying we know nothing about whether they make a difference if people take them who don't have diabetes. Smoking, you'll never find a doctor who doesn't say that smoking is bad for your health. Smoking is bad for your health. I think the good news is that people who stop smoking in British and Korean databases, if they haven't got the damage, they lose the excess risk. So it's not too late to stop smoking. Within a couple of years, you no longer have any excess risk. High blood pressure, that also means that if you treat that, you lose the excess risk. Untreated visual loss, cataracts and such, if you treat that, you lose the excess risk. Excessive alcohol consumption. I think my message is it's quite easy to have excessive alcohol consumption without really realising. If you have a large glass of wine at home, it's probably 4 to 5 units. If you have that every night, you don't have an alcohol problem, you're never drunk, but you are above the limit. You're therefore at 28 to 35. You want to keep down to 21, have days without alcohol. It's not linear, so people who, it's less than 14 that people do better. At 0, people seem to do worse, but that is probably because many people who don't drink at all have given it up because they have alcohol problems. Probably not that it's bad for your health, although I choose to believe some evenings that it's really good for you to have them. Air pollution, bad for your health, and helping it, reducing it in various places in China and Canada, for example, decreases cognitive loss and decreases dementia. So here's the list that I've gone through. I haven't got much time. Changing risk factors, does it make a difference? I think the answer is absolutely yes. We've modelled the cost savings in England with help from our economists, and they think if you decrease the salt in food, so this is they have decreased the salt in food in various places in randomised trials. What happens is people's blood pressure drops. If that was done for all of England by decreasing the salt in made food, that would decrease blood pressure, and it's expected to save 2.4 billion pounds in dementia costs. And so what does it mean? It means that there's increased evidence about dementia prevention. There is huge hope. Over half of dementias are preventable from 14 risk factors. There will be more, but the evidence is unclear. You can change it for individuals and in policy. I'm asking all of you to try and be part of that and make a difference and decrease dementia. And there's my university, UCL in the wind, which is much like it looks now. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning. My name is Wendy Goodkind. I'm the administrator here at Hammerson House. At last year's research forum, somebody asked the question to the professor who was presenting himself about dementia, is it genetic? And the answer came back, no, it's not genetic, it's just very unlucky. How do you feel about the answer to that question?
I don't quite remember that, but the answer is a bit genetic. If you have, which is extremely rare, a dominant gene which makes you develop it in midlife, that runs in families, and about 50% of people by definition develop it. It's extremely rare. If there's a lot of Alzheimer's in your family, then you are probably a bit more likely to get it than average. But even if you have, there's a gene called ApoE4, and even if you have that, more people don't develop it than do develop it. So there is a genetic risk. And even people with the highest genetic risk, if they tackle risk factors, get it later and have more years of healthy life.
Hi, I'm Nadine van Dongen. I'm founder of Patient Intelligence Panel. And fantastic, interesting presentation. I'm going to read it after this. Are all dementias included in here? So you've got like vascular dementia. So if you've got vascular dementia, would it be the same risk factors and the same?
We analysed using all-cause dementia for a variety of reasons. One of them is that most dementias people haven't done postmortems to be absolutely sure, but also as people get older, they often have more than one reason. So yes, these are this is for any cause of dementia.
Yeah, because you would think that vascular dementia, you have you've got already some problems in your brain, or and then by
all dementia you have a problem with your brain.
No, sorry, I'm sorry, but I mean, then how can education
it's resilience. If you have a stronger brain, you can cope with more damage before you develop dementia. And I think what most of us care about is how we remember and feel and judge and can look after ourselves and others rather than what's in our brain. So it's just as true of vascular dementia than of other things. If your brain is stronger, you can cope with more pathology before, more infarcts is vascular, before you develop dementia.
That's great news for someone in my family.
Thank you very much for a very interesting and exceptional talk. Thank you. Kari Dali from Brighton and Sussex Medical School, clinical academic in geriatrics. I just wanted to explore a little bit the link and the biopsychological mechanisms of social isolation and its contribution to dementia. What's the hypothesis? What's the link? Is it the cognitive reserve, the cognitive stimulation? Can you just explore that a bit further?
My colleague Andrew over there, that's what he has led most of the research in it, but I'll just summarise it for the second. We think that there's two things with social isolation, or more than two things, but one of the things is that talking to other people is the best way of getting cognitive stimulation. So that's one way. But the other thing is that being with other people tends to change your behaviour. It's better, you are more likely to eat better if you're with other people. You're more likely to exercise. You are more likely, I mean, a lot of people go to doctors and they say, I thought I was fine, but my wife or husband insisted that I come. So if you're with other people, you look after yourself better. So it's more than one. But even if you take into account the looking after yourself better, it's still social isolation makes a difference.
Socially connected, you're less likely.
I think we have to stop,
Thank you very much.
Hi, we have some questions from online. The first one is from Treasure. The question is, how can policies be shaped to improve educational access for individuals with cognitive impairments?
Well, I think that policy should be before people develop cognitive impairment, rather than after. That they develop educational cognitive impairment to prevent dementia. It's already been a huge change from school leaving age to being 14 to being 16 to having education till they're 18. So I think all of these things make a difference. And then access to work has become more cognitively stimulating as a lot more of labour-related work has become mechanised, but both work and education and even allowing for ill health and retirement, there's quite a clear evidence that retirement is in itself a risk factor for dementia. So I think that I'm quite for this increasing the age of retirement, because I think it's good for people, though obviously not if you're doing a massively physically demanding job. But in other things, I think policy can help us keep functioning.
Thank you. We have another question from online, from China. Vivian asks whether a low-carb diet could decrease the risk of dementia.
We know that obesity is a risk. So people with low-carb diets are less likely to be obese. They're less likely to develop diabetes, less likely to have high blood pressure. It's extremely difficult to work out whether the diet itself makes a difference but it certainly can change these things which are risk factors for dementia. But the sort of evidence isn't there that a low-carb diet reduces dementia per se, apart from the difference it can make to things like your body weight, cholesterol.
Susan Grant, Vice President, Nightingale Hammerson. The question, you talked about middle age. Can you give us an idea of what age that is?
Yeah. I think I talked about midlife rather than middle-aged. But midlife is till 65, and after that you fall off a cliff in a road on the evening of your birthday.
That's it.
But there's young, old and old, Susan, so don't worry about it too much.
Hi, I'm Laura Nolans. I'm a volunteer at Jewish Care Holocaust Survivor Centre. I just wanted to know, what do you think the relationship with smartphones and screens are going to do for dementia in the future?
I think it's hard to know what it's going to do, because it's, like most things, pretty complex. It might decrease social isolation or increase it, depending on what people do. It might decrease movement. So I think it probably depends how you use it. I think, but there is no evidence to this, but we're looking into it, that a variety of tech and robots and things may be very helpful when people have dementia. It won't take away, it will be in addition to rather than other things, but I think it may be a great help in many things. But I don't think we know about smartphones. And I think that smartphones and things are probably a tool that, so like other tools, it depends how you use them.
Hello, I'm Aisha Khan. I'm a physiotherapist here. So my question is, yesterday one of my colleagues asked in a workshop that when we work with the people with dementia for most of the time, so it's like when you work, when you spend time with somebody, you get their traits. So if we work with dementia people for most of the time, so can we get their behavioral instincts, like if our nature will match or we get some things from them? I know dementia is not contagious, but it's like, can we get their traits?
That's why I came up here, because I missed some of it.
She said if you're working with dementia patients, is it more likely to get their behavior patterns in us later in the age when we are at the same age as they are right now?
Let me just, so that I can use the... I really hope not, because I have worked with people with dementia for so very, very long. I don't think so, no. Working in dementia, as far as we know, there's no infectivity, and it doesn't make you more likely. And the work that people do here tends to be both physically and cognitively stimulating, and might make them a bit less likely to do it, because it's really hard work in every domain, cognitively, socially and physically.
Thank you.